Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 321. Is Georgina back? The disciples of the Moon Palace were furious and ready to fight. "Do they have no shame?" said one disciple. "We will not be spoken to like that," yelled another angrily. "Let us get rid of them, Phoebe," screamed another moon girl looking at Phoebe. They all wanted Phoebe to give the order to fight. But Phoebe was only in charge temporarily, and she didn't know what to do. If she chose wrong, she would have to explain herself to Georgina. "Phoebe doesn't have anything to say," Blaze said, smirking. "I guess that means we're free to do whatever we like." He called over to his men and jerked his chin at the moon disciples. "Pick whatever girl you fancy," he said. "They won't dare to resist. And if they do, we'll destroy the Moon Palace and kill every woman here." The man stepped forward to examine the women, but they glared at him, shouting threats and promising to kill him if he got any closer. "No one move," Phoebe ordered. Blaze had said that he would destroy the Moon Palace if they fought him, and she couldn't bear the thought of that. She couldn't allow her sisters to attack. "Phoebe, are you going to let him do whatever he wants with us?" one disciple asked. Phoebe was paralyzed with indecision. She didn't like either of her options. "Pick me," she said. She couldn't let her sisters suffer, so she had to sacrifice herself. The man was overjoyed. He had been excited enough by the other women, but this one was of the highest rank, and she was the most beautiful woman here. He couldn't wait to touch her. He walked over to Phoebe and reached out his hand toward her chest, his eyes glued to her. Phoebe closed her eyes and clenched her fists. She felt humiliated, but she knew she had to endure this to protect her sisters. Right before the man's hand made contact with her chest, Phoebe heard a whistling sound as a blade flew through the air and pierced the man's hand. He fell to the ground, squealing with pain. "It's Georgina!" someone yelled. Everyone looked around, trying to find the person who had thrown the blade. Blaze and the other gang leaders knew that only Georgina Fox knew how to throw blades in that way. The disciples of the Moon Palace were overjoyed, and they were busy looking around, trying to find their lady. They all took strength from the knowledge she was here, and they began to regain their courage. "How dare you attack us?" called a voice from behind the gangs. "Clearly, you have a death wish." Two women strode through the crowd to stand beside Phoebe. "Callisto, Luna, you're back!" Phoebe cried, happy to see them. "Thank you for looking after our sisters," Callisto said. The man who had been about to touch Phoebe got to his feet and ran back toward his gang, cradling his injured hand. "Coward!" Callisto called after him. Then she and Luna shot their white and yellow scarves from their sleeves, binding the man. "How dare you invade the Moon Palace?" Callisto said, pulling the scarf tighter. The scarves contained special steel wires, which began to dig into the man's skin. Callisto strode forward and struck the man several times, sending him crashing to the floor. When she unwrapped the scarves, he didn't move. The gangs watched, their mouths hanging open, and they all took a step back. 3 more people arrived and came to stand beside Callisto and Luna. It was Celeste, Celine, and Alex, who was carrying Debbie on his back. "Why are you just standing here?" Blaze roared to his men. "Deal with them, and don't screw this up." He looked around at his gang. "We outnumber them," he said. "No matter how good Georgina's martial arts are, they can't beat us. Tonight we will capture the Moon Palace. Then we'll take all their money and all the women." The other gang leaders also encouraged their men, and they all began to grow more confident. "You're all just disciples," Blaze said, looking at them. "Why doesn't Georgina show herself?" "I don't need Georgina to deal with you," Alex said, stepping forward. "I can deal with you myself." He still carried a sleeping Debbie on his back. Alex knew he had to keep quiet about Georgina's death. If word got out, then more people would come to attack the Moon Palace. "Who are you?" Blaze asked, looking him up and down, clearly unimpressed. "I'm a disciple of Georgina," Alex said. "Take your people and leave. Don't ever come back. Whatever happened is in the past, and you need to forget it." Blaze laughed. "Forget it?" he asked. "Our men are about to take the Moon Palace, and you expect me to just walk away?" He sneered at Alex. "Since you're Georgina's disciple, I'll kill you first, and then I'll take the palace." He's a weakling, Blaze thought. He'll make a fine example to the others, especially those 2 silly girls who attacked my man. All 4 Moon Maidens were ready to kill Blaze for Alex. Without waiting for a response, they rushed at Blaze, and everyone began to fight. Blaze was strong, and even though he was surrounded by the 4 women, he wasn't overwhelmed by their forces. He fought hard, managing to hold his own. "Let me help," someone called, and several gang members joined the fight, giving Blaze the advantage. The Moon Maidens were starting to struggle. "Stupid girl," Blaze said, sneering at Callisto. "Did you really think you were a match for me?" He punched her hard in the chest, knocking her backward. Callisto fell to the ground, her hand on her chest as she gasped for air. The other 3 women dashed over to her, determined to help. Alex could see that the Moon Maidens couldn't deal with Blaze and his men, and he knew he would have to join the fight. He handed Debbie over to Callisto and ran at Blaze. "Loser," Blaze said, his lip curling with contempt. "Are you finally ready to fight? Well, this shouldn't take long." He doubted Alex would put up much of a struggle. "I've given you a chance to leave," Alex said. "You didn't take it, and you've hurt my friends, so now you have to pay." He was furious, and he knew he would have to defeat these people to end the crisis. He dove into the middle of the gangs, striking out at several men and knocking them to the ground. He made each strike count, taking each man out of commission as quickly as possible, and then moving on to the next target. He kicked out at one gang leader and heard the man's leg break. Space began to appear around him, as some fighters hit the ground and others backed away. Blaze and the other gang leaders simply stared at him, recognizing that he fought just like Georgina. They were shocked by how powerful he was, but they wouldn't back down. "Let's go," Blaze urged the other leaders. "We can deal with him together." he realized they would have to work together to have any chance of defeating Alex. Episode 322, Love or Responsibility. The gang leaders knew that they all needed to attack at once. If Blaze couldn't defeat Alex by himself, then neither could the rest of them. They looked at each other and then they ran forward. Moments later, a large number of people had surrounded Alex. But Alex was still proving difficult to beat. Alex knew he had too many opponents. He was holding his own, but eventually he would grow tired and start to make mistakes. At that point, he would lose. He fought decisively and without mercy, determined to keep going. He punched a man in the face, and the gang member went down, his nose broken. Another man attacked Alex from behind, but Alex kicked backward, hitting the man right in the abdomen and sending him flying. A cracking sound suggested that several ribs were broken, so the man wouldn't be getting back up for a while. Several people rushed at Alex, and he jumped up, spinning around and lashing out with both hands and feet, taking out several opponents. All around Alex, people were being knocked to the floor, most of them unable to get back up. No one seemed able to injure Alex, and the Moon Disciples thought he was amazing. "Attack the women!" Blaze shouted the order. He hoped that if the gang members attacked the Disciples, it might divide Alex's attention. If Alex was distracted, then they might be able to defeat him. "On it!" someone called. And then many of the men ran straight at the Disciples. "Attack!" cried the Moon Maidens. "Fight back and avenge our fallen sisters!" The other women cheered their agreement, keen to attack these men who had invaded their home and insulted them. Now they could finally make the men pay. More than 700 women joined the fight against the gangs. Alex looked back, checking that the injured Callisto was still guarding Debbie. Although Callisto had been hurt by Blaze's attack, she was still strong enough to defend Debbie from anyone who got too close. But Alex was still worried about Debbie's safety. He kicked a man in the back, sending him sprawling, and then he made his way over to Debbie. Blaze realized where Alex was going, and he looked over at the unconscious woman. He realized she must be important to Alex, and he wondered if he could use the woman against him. Alex reached Callisto, but he had been followed by several gang members who were still trying to attack him. He grabbed one of Callisto's scarves and snapped the wire inside it into little pieces. "Get out of here!" Alex yelled, tossing out the pieces of wire as though they were throwing stars. The wires flew like bullets, hitting several of the men, who then fell to the ground, groaning with pain. "That's his woman!" Blaze cried, pointing at Debbie. "Kill her first!" The other men followed his gaze, and then they sprang into action, attacking Debbie. Alex was startled and scrambled to put Debbie on his back, but he was surrounded by dozens of gang members. He was watching the men in front of him when he heard a noise from behind. Surprised, he turned around to see two men reaching for Debbie. "Don't even think about it!" Alex yelled, kicking the men away. "Do you really expect to survive this?" Blaze asked, laughing. He struck out, and Alex was unable to dodge the blow. It hit him right in the face, sending him to the ground, and blood trickled from his split lip. A quick check assured him that Debbie was unharmed. "Look," Blaze said, pointing at him. "He can't fight us while he's protecting the woman." He turned to the men and screamed, "Get him!" Dozens of men rushed at Alex. Alex knew he was no match for these people. He had to protect Debbie, and that put him at a disadvantage. He couldn't hold her and fight, so if he stayed, they would both be killed. But if he ran away with Debbie, then the women wouldn't be able to fight for long. He was getting pulled between his love and his responsibility. Suddenly, Callisto yelled, "Mr. Alex, please run and save Debbie. Don't think about us. We will fight till our last breaths. We are Georgina's disciples. We won't give up so easily. Run. Save Debbie." Alex looked around, planning his retreat. "There's no escape," Blaze told him. "Only death." He moved closer, wanting to end this quickly. Debbie groaned, and then she roused enough to be sick. Worryingly, her vomit contained a trace of blood. "Debbie?" Alex asked, really worried. "Are you okay?" He needed to find a quiet place where he could push his inner power into her and make her better. He didn't have time to fight with Blaze, so he fled, still carrying Debbie on his back. He needed to stabilize Debbie's condition, and then he would come back to save the Moon Palace. "Don't let him get away!" Blaze shouted. "Kill him!" He chased after Alex, and the other gang members followed him. Although Alex was carrying Debbie, he was still faster than Blaze, but he couldn't quite manage to lose him. He ran into a pine forest, and he noticed that the air seemed clearer and more peaceful, making it easier to breathe. Strangely, Blaze and the other men were nowhere in sight. They seemed to have disappeared. "What's going on?" Alex wondered, looking around. He stopped and listened carefully for any sign of the men pursuing him. It was eerily quiet. Pale moonlight shone on scattered leaves on the ground, and there were no signs of anyone nearby. He let out a breath, unsure why the others were no longer chasing them, but relieved they weren't. "How are you, Debbie?" Alex asked as he placed her gently on the ground. Her face was far too pale, and there was a trace of blood around her mouth. Her body was limp, and she was shivering uncontrollably in the cold air. "I'll give you some of my internal power," he said, placing her on the ground, propped up against a tree. He sat beside her and tried to pass some of his power to her, hoping it could heal her. "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" a voice called from among the trees. Alex looked around, but he couldn't see anyone. The voice seemed to have come from nowhere. "Who are you?" the voice asked again. "And how did you get through my barrier?" Alex stood up, ready to carry Debbie away. A flash of white came from the dark forest as a man rushed out. Alex was surprised by the attack and scrambled to defend himself. The man was incredibly strong, and Alex had to work hard to block him. Alex was shocked. The man used moves that were more powerful than Alex's, and Alex struggled to cope. The man moved back a little, and Alex realized he was an older man with white hair. "I recognize that fighting style," the man said, looking at Alex. "Who are you? And why do you fight like Georgina?" Episode 323, A Blast from the Past. Alex remembered that when Georgina and Zora had been fighting back in Washington, D.C., They had spoken about a man called Xavier Myers. They had mentioned that Xavier had set up a barrier so they couldn't find him. Is this man Xavier? He wondered, gaping at the man. Are you Xavier Myers? Alex asked. Only I can ask questions here, Xavier said sternly, not denying his identity. Who are you to Georgina? Her student, Alex said, telling him the truth. Ah, no wonder you fight like her, Xavier said, impressed by Alex's skill. How is she? I'm sorry, Alex trailed off, feeling sad. Georgina and Zora fought, and they both died. They passed on their internal power to me. What? Xavier asked, stunned. He had grown up with Georgina and Zora, all of them studying martial arts together, and now both women were gone, leaving him alone. When they died, they were still arguing about which of them you loved more, Alex said. They were both loyal to you. He wanted Xavier to know how much the women had loved him. I know, Xavier said, closing his eyes and sighing. The two women had died because of him, and he was sorry about that. But if he had to do it all over again, he would make the same choice and lock himself away, ignoring them both. Why did you come here? Xavier asked, opening his eyes. I came to find a special orchid to cure my girlfriend, Alex said. But several gangs have attacked the Moon Palace, and now they're under siege. Please help me. The Moon Society is Georgina's work, so we can't let it be destroyed. I'll come, Xavier agreed. Georgina had died because of him. He felt this was the least he could do for her in her memory. Thank you, Alex said, relieved. Debbie coughed. It was too cold outside, and the poison was attacking her body, making her feel uncomfortable. Alex's chest grew tight with worry. He knew he needed to give her more of his internal power as soon as possible. It's you! Xavier exclaimed, staring at Debbie with an ecstatic expression. He could never forget that face. He was so excited that he was shaking as he ran over to Debbie, his eyes roaming over her. Debbie scrunched up her nose, and a trickle of blood came from the corner of her mouth. Xavier was shocked. What's wrong? He asked. He quickly took her hand and concentrated on passing his strong internal power to her. Xavier's skill was extraordinary. Debbie soon looked a little better. Debbie slowly opened her eyes and saw a man with white hair who seemed to be helping her. She smiled at him and said, Thank you. Do you remember me? Xavier asked, watching her face to see how she reacted. Have we met? Debbie asked, frowning. She was sure she had never seen this man before. You had been unconscious for a long time when I found you, Xavier said. I took you back to the place I shared with my two friends, and I spent days trying to make you better. You were dizzy a lot, but sometimes you opened your eyes and saw me. Then one day your family came to look for you, and you left with them. Do you remember now? Xavier had taken care of the woman and had fallen in love with her. The woman had barely spoken to him, but he had been attracted by her appearance and temperament. When the woman's family had come for her, he had asked for her name, and they told him it was Cynthia Clifton. His feelings for Cynthia had made him keep his distance from Georgina and Zora. Eventually, he had hidden himself away from them, shutting them out of his life so that he could dream about being with Cynthia. He had never expected to see the woman again in his lifetime. But this seemed to be Cynthia before him, in the flesh. Debbie frowned. She wasn't sure who this man was, but she knew she had gaps in her memory that might be preventing her from remembering him, so she couldn't honestly say they had never met. "No," Debbie said, shaking her head. "I don't remember." "Can you heal Debbie?" Alex asked. Xavier had already helped her more than Alex had been able to, so perhaps he was strong enough to cure her. "Debbie?" Xavier asked, confused for a moment. He looked at Debbie and asked, "Isn't your name Cynthia?" "Cynthia is my mother," Debbie said, giving him a faint smile. Xavier gaped at her. He released Debbie's hand and asked, "How is your mother now? And where is she?" Xavier was growing old, and he wanted to see the people he cared about before he died. "She's gone," Debbie said, tears welling up. "Really?" Xavier asked, sighing. "Yes," Alex said. 20 years ago, Debbie's mother fell off a cliff and died." 20 years ago? Xavier repeated to himself. "She fell off a cliff and died." He shook his head. "All this time I've been waiting for her, and she's been gone for 20 years. He looked up at the sky and laughed bitterly. "I'm sorry," Alex said, but Xavier wasn't listening. "What have I done?" Xavier muttered. "I turned my back on the 2 women who loved me, and for what? My beloved died 20 years ago. Georgina and Zora cared for me, and I let them down. They died because of me." He shook his head. "I'm cursed. There is no man more damned than I am." He looked away, looking up at the sky. Then he stopped a short distance away, clenched his fists, and screamed like an injured animal. The sound echoed through the trees. "What's wrong?" Alex cried. Xavier turned and ran at Alex, slapping his hand hard against Alex's forehead and pressing his palm to his skin. Alex reeled back, shocked. Xavier had hit him so hard that, for a moment, he had thought the blow would knock his head off. But now he felt Xavier's internal power flooding into him, so strong that it threatened to overwhelm him. "I'm giving you all my internal power," Xavier said, watching him. "You already have the combined power of Georgina and Zora. With mine added to your strength, it'll be more than enough for you to eradicate the men who are attacking the Moon Palace." He sighed and shook his head. "I never managed to reconcile with Georgina and Zora while they were alive, but our power is united within you. That's all I can do." Episode 324, The Battle for the Moon Palace. Alex barely heard what Xavier was saying. He fought to control his breathing as Xavier's internal force continued to pour into him. Gradually, the flow of power slowed, and Xavier dropped his hand, falling to the ground. "Xavier!" Alex cried, squatting to check on his condition. But Xavier's eyes were closed. He had already slipped away. Alex leaned Xavier's body against a pine tree and bowed his head. "I didn't expect you to die so soon," he said, sighing. "Georgina and Zora spoke highly of you, and I wish I'd had more time to speak with you. I hope you'll all be reunited now. Rest in peace." He remained silent for a moment, honoring the man. Then he raised his head. "Now I need to go and save the Moon Palace," he said. "I promise I'll return and bury you once everything is safe." He took a final look at Xavier, and then he went over to Debbie. Debbie had improved slightly after Xavier had given her some of his power, but she was starting to fade again, and she was drifting in and out of consciousness. "Debbie, I have to go and save the Moon Maidens," Alex said. "You should get some sleep." He hoped that if she were unconscious, then she wouldn't feel any pain. Debbie nodded. Alex stroked her hair, pushing a little power into her and sending her to sleep. Then he lifted her onto his back and sprinted back to the Moon Palace. As Alex ran, he found that his speed and physical strength had greatly improved since he had absorbed Xavier's vast internal power. He reached the Moon Palace in no time, and he could hear that the fighting was still ongoing. Worried, he placed Debbie beside a pine tree and covered her with weeds and branches. Then he ran toward the Moon Palace. The gangs and disciples were locked in battle, fighting fiercely, and neither side was willing to back down. Hundreds of people were badly injured. The Moon Disciples knew the territory better than the invaders, and their martial arts skills were superior. But they were badly outnumbered, and dozens of them had fallen. The women's clothes were blood-stained, and many of the disciples were hurt. They knew they couldn't hold out much longer. Defeat seemed inevitable. The 4 Moon Maidens had fought well, dispatching many of their enemies. They knew they had to survive, or the Moon Cult would be defeated, and all would be lost. They were all injured, and the gang leaders knew that without these 4 women, the others would be easily defeated. "There's no need to fight," Blaze told them. "We don't want to damage such beautiful women. If you surrender, then we'll let you remain in charge here. Isn't that better than serving Georgina?" "Shut up," Callisto said, shooting one of her white scarves right at his eye. Blaze raised his knife and cut the material into pieces. "Just for that, I'll kill you first," he said, striking out at her with his knife. "Callisto!" the other 3 Moon Maidens cried out. They could see that Callisto was in danger and they wanted to help. But they were surrounded by enemies, and they wouldn't be able to reach her in time. "Go to hell!" Blaze snarled, his eyes gleaming with his anticipated victory. Callisto watched in horror, knowing that she couldn't avoid the blow. She was so scared she could hardly move. Just as the knife was about to make contact, it was kicked out of Blaze's hand, falling harmlessly to the ground. Blaze shook his hand as he fell back. "Are you okay?" Alex asked, coming to stand beside Callisto and wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "Mr. Alex!" Callisto exclaimed. She could hardly believe it. Alex had managed to save her at the last moment. "You again," Blaze said, recognizing Alex. He turned to all the gang leaders around him. "Let's deal with this loser once and for all. We'll send him to hell." "You first," Alex yelled, pushing Callisto away. It was too dangerous for her to be around him. "We won't let you run away this time, loser," Blaze said. "Get him!" Dozens of men charged at Alex. Alex knew he would have to subdue these men if he wanted to save the palace, so he ran toward them. As he reached the first man, he leapt into the air and kicked out, knocking the man to the ground. Everyone gaped in awe, realizing that this young man's skill was greater than Georgina's. Even Alex was surprised by how much faster and stronger he was now. Alex kicked out 2 men, causing them to drop their weapons. Then he struck another man, knocking him out cold. He took the legs out from under a 4th man, sending him sprawling. These men were renowned martial arts experts, and Alex had humiliated them. Everyone was shocked, and they couldn't look away. Alex was too impressive. They were all in awe of him. Alex didn't stop. He continued to attack, leaving a trail of bodies in his wake. Men lay on the ground, groaning with pain. Several gang leaders were thrown through the air, landing hard and breaking their limbs in the process. The gang members grew wary and started to lose their taste for fighting. Blaze knew he had to act quickly. If Alex managed to turn the tide, there would be no mercy. Blaze had led the attack on the Moon Palace, and Alex would never let him go. So even though Blaze was afraid, he still tried his best to kill Alex. "We can't let him survive," he cried out to the other men. He looked over at Falcon, the leader of one of the other gangs. Falcon's position wasn't any better than his. If Alex got the upper hand, then both Blaze and Falcon were dead. Alex turned to look at Falcon, and Blaze made his move. He grabbed his blade and lunged at Alex's back, determined to end him. Instead of turning around, Alex kicked his right leg backward, knocking the knife out of Blaze's hand. Then he kicked again, smacking Blaze right in the middle of his chest and sending him flying. Although Blaze was in pain, he smiled, knowing that Alex's actions had put him at a disadvantage. While Alex had been distracted, Falcon had tossed a small explosive device at him. He had missed, but the blast shook the ground, causing Alex to lose his balance and fall. Explosions were Falcon's specialty, and he just loved blowing things up. A hole had appeared in the ground, and Alex fell into it, pulling Falcon in alongside him. "Gotcha!" Falcon said. He pulled out a wire, wrapping it around Alex's neck. He began to pull the wire tighter, determined to strangle Alex. Nobody could save him now. Episode 325, Begging for Mercy. Everyone stumbled as the ground continued to shake, and they stared at the hole where Alex and Falcon had disappeared. The gang leaders expected that Falcon would kill Alex while they were inside the hole, and the Moon Maidens were all worried. They knew how powerful Falcon was. A moment later, 2 figures burst out of the hole, and the Moon Maidens were relieved to see Alex wasn't dead. Alex was quick to react. Before Falcon could pull the wire tight around his neck, Alex grabbed him, preventing him from moving. Falcon knew that this was his only chance to kill Alex, and if he failed, he would be in trouble. He used all his strength, but Alex resisted him. Alex surprised him by dropping to the ground, and Falcon lost his grip on the wire, setting Alex free. "It's not so easy to kill me," Alex said, hitting out at Falcon's chest, sending him staggering. He kicked out, striking Falcon's abdomen, making him grunt with pain. Then he continued to pummel Falcon, never letting up. Finally, Alex kicked him solid in the chest, and Falcon dropped to the ground. He raised his head a little, but he couldn't get back up. Falcon lay there, panting heavily as he glared at Alex. His hands clenched at nothing as he tried again to get up. Finally, he gave up and let his head fall back with a thud. The other gang leaders were scared stiff as they stared at Alex. They had stopped fighting the Moon Maidens and watched Alex, afraid he would attack them next. Alex stamped his foot on the ground and looked around at the Moon Disciples. The women sprang into action, hitting out at the invaders. The men screamed as they fell, scrambling to escape. Alex fought with several gang members, dealing with them swiftly and protecting the disciples of the Moon Cult. "Stop, please," one of the gang members cried. It was clear that they couldn't possibly win, and if they continued to fight, they would die. All the gang members stopped fighting and began to plead for mercy. "We give up," one of the leaders yelled. "Let us leave, and we'll never dare to invade the Moon Palace again." The other men cried out, abandoning their pride. "We swear," cried one with a bloody nose and missing teeth. "Just let us go," said another with a broken limb. "It was all Blaze's fault and Falcon's," cried another, laying on the ground, panting. The 4 Moon Maidens walked over to Alex. "Blaze was the one who instigated the attack," Callisto told him. "He has always wanted to control these mountains, and now he has killed some of my sisters. We cannot let him go." Alex nodded. Then he looked at her with concern. "Sit down and rest," he said. "And Blaze?" Callisto asked. Then she looked around and gasped when she couldn't see Blaze anywhere. Alex's eyes swept the crowd, locking onto something, and then he stalked off. Everyone hurried out of his way. They had seen what he could do, and they didn't want to be next. Terrified, they ran for cover. As the crowd parted, Alex spotted Blaze. When Blaze saw Alex bearing down on him, he raced forward to meet him. He tried to use all his skills to block Alex, but nothing worked. Although Blaze was a big man, he was no match for Alex. Alex slapped Blaze's face, leaving him dazed. Then Alex grabbed his arm and pulled it hard, twisting it a little. Blaze screamed as his shoulder was dislocated. Alex grabbed Blaze by the shirt and threw him in the direction of the Moon Palace disciples. The women fell on him, yelling at him as they attacked. "Avenge our sisters!" cried some. "Deal with him once and for all," cried another. "Not so tough now, are you?" They all hid and kicked him, crowding in and blocking Alex's view. When they eventually stepped back, Blaze was lying motionless, his eyes closed and his clothes torn. The disciples were satisfied with their revenge on the man who had invaded their home and hurt their sisters. The gang members trembled with fear when they saw what had happened to Blaze. Again, they began to beg for their lives. "Please, let us live. Forgive us," said one man with a blue eye. "I swear we'll never bother you again," cried the others. They all dropped to their knees, not too proud to plead with Alex to spare them. "Mr. Alex, these lowlives invaded the Moon Palace," Callisto said, her hand holding the injured shoulder as she looked at the gang members. "That is unforgivable, and they deserve to die." The gang members began to shake even harder, their eyes wide with terror. "Callisto, let Mr. Alex decide," Celeste said, looking at her sister. She knew it was wrong for them to interfere with Alex's decision. They were sworn to serve him, not give him orders. "What do you think should be done?" Alex asked the 4 women. He didn't understand the situation with the gangs in this area, and he didn't have enough information to know what to do. The Moon Maidens had stayed in the Moon Palace before, so he wanted to hear their advice. Mr. Alex, the gangs here fight with each other, killing and injuring countless people every year, Luna said. Only when the Moon Palace is superior in strength can we maintain the peace around here. I suggest we make these gangs answerable to the Moon Palace. If any of them try something like this again, then some of the other gangs might warn us. Luna rarely said much, but she often saw things clearly. Luna is right, Celeste said. That way, whenever there are conflicts among the gangs, we can intervene. Besides, she thought, we can also ask them to pay a tribute. We agree, Callisto and Selene said. Okay, Alex said. Then we'll go with Luna's suggestion. He turned around to announce the decision, but Celeste stopped him. Mr. Alex, wait a minute, she said. She walked up to Alex and looked around at everyone. This is Mr. Alex, she called out. He is Georgina's apprentice, and 2 months ago, Georgina passed on the leadership of the Moon Palace to him.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.